talking to us about Lee Miller, an explosive contribution to Surrealism. All right, can you hear me? Testing.
All right, welcome. Thank you. Good morning. Today my paper is titled Lee Miller, an Explosive Contribution to Surrealism, and I wrote this paper last semester for a 20th century history and theory class. I'm a sophomore art history major at Baylor University. And Lee Miller has honestly been such an incredible research topic, and the exploration of her oeuvre is just really incredible, so we'll get started. In Rosalind Krauss's 1985 article, Photography in Service of Surrealism, the art theorist begins with a critical contradiction. She claims that because photography has its roots in reality, it cannot immediately contribute to surrealism, which is rooted in the subconscious. Krauss elaborates, surrealism was defined from the start as a revolution in values, a reorganization of the very way the real was conceived. However, Krauss ultimately breaks down the paradox that separates photography and surrealism. She develops a theory claiming that photography, while a window into the real world, can easily be manipulated to benefit surrealist ideas. Krauss continues to claim that photography is surreal by nature, even as it announces this experience of reality. The camera frame, of course, controls it, configures it. Negative printing, spacing, and solarization are ways in which photographers have, and still do, alter the effects of photography towards surrealist ends. This paper explores Lee Miller's role in extending photography's reach towards surrealist ends during the movement's peak in the late 1920s and into the 1930s. Miller seeks to reveal the banalities of modern life as naturally surreal. Her approach to surrealism lacks violent juxtaposition and aggressive images that emphasize male domination. However, in the grand art historical record of surrealism, Miller is often left out. Miller's contribution to surrealism is remembered as artist Man Ray's muse, or his artistic collaborator, rarely as an artist in her own right. My research seeks to expose the way Lee Miller transcends the traditional trope of the muse to establish a new feminine representation of surrealism. In her photograph Exploding Hand, Miller uses photo manipulation coupled with her portrayal of the modern world to reveal a natural surrealist juxtaposition between the outward world and the inward subconscious. This synthesis of the surreal world and the natural world highlights André Breton's concept of dual surrealism. Before moving to Paris in 1929, Miller posed as a fashion model in New York City. She worked closely with iconic fashion photographer Edward Steichen, who encouraged her to explore her interests in photography. Through her connection with Steichen, Miller met surrealist photographer Man Ray. In Philip Proger's catalog of the Partners in Surrealism exhibition in 2011, he claims Miller and Man Ray's status in the surrealist movement. Both Lee Miller and Man Ray were artists of enormous originality and skill. However, Miller continues to be referred to diminutively as Man Ray's muse. Emerging scholarship suggests that the passive attitude towards Miller's work is a result of her foundation in fashion photography. Jane Livingston, the curator of Miller's first retrospective in 1989, explains the foundation of this attitude. In the retrospective catalog, Livingston claims, understanding Lee Miller's fundamental vision as a photographer is to see that although she may have been said to have been grounded in fashion photography and all it implied, and though she gained a thorough understanding of this wily craft, she always chafed under its constraints. The objectification of the modeling world in the 1920s undermined her reputation as a serious artist, especially after one of her images was connected with a feminine hygiene advertisement. The scandal ended her career in fashion abruptly. Miller took this opportunity to develop her photographic craft under the guidance of surrealist photographer Man Ray. Lee Miller's relationship with photographer Man Ray was problematic and passionate. Miller served as Man Ray's assistant, lover, and artistic partner for 4 years. Many photographs attributed to Man Ray of Lee Miller were influenced directly by Miller's creative eye. Together, they discovered the photographic process of solarization. Solarization is a photo manipulation technique that reverses the highlights and shadows by exposing light to film as it's being fixed in the darkroom. This process was influential in Man Ray and Miller's surrealistic style. Over the years, Man Ray would become obsessed with Lee. As his fascination grew, Miller resisted. She lived her life as she pleased and would not be objectified or restrained by any man. The stylistic differences between Miller and Man Ray highlight the gendered sides of surrealism. Livingston writes, "The interesting thing about Miller's participation with Man Ray is that she did not slavishly adopt either the new techniques or basic stylistic vocabulary of her mentor. The images from Miller's first mature period are Lee Miller's own. Therefore, the contrast study of Man Ray and Lee Miller is essential. In Man Ray's portrait of Lee Miller, his collaborator and friend is captured in a submissive fashion. Her body is curled to highlight the curve of her breasts, thighs, and the length of her neck. In Lee Miller's self-portrait, Miller portrays herself in a position of power. The warm light highlights the strength of her arms and torso. The tilt of her head is confident and sure. Two other photographs of quintessential surrealist subjects also highlight the masculine and feminine sides of surrealism. Man Ray's image, The Prayer, displays a woman bent at the waist in a subservient position with her hands clasped behind her in a suggestive manner. This beautiful photograph emphasizes this woman's sexuality from a masculine and dominant point of view. In contrast, Miller's nude bent forward highlights female sensuality and the fluidity of her figure. While the model is still stripped of her identity, her body is positioned gracefully. While I believe Man Ray's surrealism is an essential and masterful collection of photography, Lee Miller claims the same photographic significance with an independent, feminine approach. Beyond her time with Man Ray in Paris, Miller traveled all over the world. She expanded her style through her life experiences. She photographed Egyptian landscapes in 1934 after marrying Egyptian businessman Aziza Louis Bey. During her 4 years in Egypt, Miller produced stunning surrealist images of the desert. However, after 4 years of serving as a kept wife, Miller sought freedom away from the gender-explicit boundaries of her marriage. She soon returned to Paris to begin photographing her friends in surrealist circles. In the outbreak of the Second World War, Miller photographed the liberation of concentration camps with Allied troops. While capturing the atrocities of violence, Miller continues to emphasize a natural and measured eye toward her photographic style. Upon returning to Paris, she furthermore captured friends and family after marrying her second husband, Roland Penrose, in the 1940s. While the success of her work is in the foundational education she received under Man Ray's guidance, Lee Miller develops a style that moves above and beyond Man Ray's influence. For example, Miller's studies of the Parisian streets in 1930 set her apart from Man Ray's work, which was conducted mostly in the studio. Surrealist juxtaposition is often considered violent and masculine in nature. Man Ray's work is an excellent example of masculine domination in the surrealist movement. In contrast, Miller works to portray surrealism in a strong, feminine light. She eliminates aggression while presenting the Parisian world as surreal in its own right. For example, Miller was fascinated by the dual realities presented in early surrealist publications, such as André Breton's surrealist poetry. Breton's main claims serve to highlight our interior reality and its relationship to our outward world. The unification of these dual realities, authored by Breton, serves to motivate surrealism. He explains, we have attempted to present interior reality and exterior reality as two elements in process of unification, or finally becoming one. The final unification is the supreme aim of surrealism. In Patrick Wahlberg's publication, Surrealism, he describes the surrealist artist's mindset when considering the unity of these worlds. There is among all surrealist artists a desire to find, over and beyond appearances, a truer reality, a kind of synthesis of the exterior world and of the interior model. The awareness of this surreality is caused most frequently by a sense of bewilderment. Man Ray's work mainly explored the surreal model of the mind, while Miller explored the world beyond the studio and worked to incorporate the modern world with the subconscious mind. Miller produced a series of images labeled Contact Sheet, Grandland Shopfront Paris, 1930. These images were an intense study of form and technique in the windows of an exotic perfume shop. The seventh image on this contact sheet, Exploding Hand, is a prime example of Breton's study of dual realities. The physicality of the scratched glass grounds the viewer in the exterior world, while the dispersion of the woman's hand lends to the emphasis of the interior mind. This image serves Rosalind Krauss's theory that photography and surrealism can coexist productively by highlighting the transformation within the camera's frame. Miller manipulates her position to the image to portray a surreal narrative. This image is a defining moment in Miller's style and creates a distinction between her work and Man Ray's. The image, Exploding Hand, portrays a woman's arm reaching out to grasp the handle of a glass door. There are scratches on the glass in front of the woman's hand, creating an illusion of a hand exploding. These scratches were caused by women's engagement rings as they grabbed the handle to enter or perhaps exit the shop. Photographed in a time of economic turmoil, the crash of the stock market and the beginnings of the Great Depression, Miller was thinking of the elegant irony. Miller highlights feminine elements such as the bell-shaped sleeve of the woman's garment, adding contrast to the rather abrupt and violent nature of the quote-unquote exploding hand. The hazy explosion, coupled with the tilt of the door frame, serves to provide unnatural movement to such a simple task. Exploding Hand was purposefully cropped to address the position of the viewer in the physical world and the psychological world. With this image, Miller uses photo manipulation techniques crucial to photosurrealism, like the cropping of an image to express the surreal. As we see from the contact sheet, she crops the image from a square frame to a rectangle in the final stage. This action eliminates the viewer's ability to see inside the perfume shop. Miller crops this image in order to draw the viewer's attention to the explosion, but also eliminates any sense of placement. When viewing this photograph, the viewer cannot tell if they are inside looking out or outside looking in. Miller eliminates physical context, contributing to the surrealist ideas of dual realities. She emphasizes the strong relationship between the fantastical world of the mind and the seemingly rational world we all live in. Miller uses these techniques with determination and skill, producing images that highlight her capabilities and elevate her status above a mere muse. Reflections in photography draw attention to the many layers of the physical and metaphysical worlds. Miller uses reflections as a strong tool in this image. She captures a tree line reflecting off the glass of the storefront. It ominously glows in a flattened representation of depth and space. Miller's use of reflections confronts the physical image before her, as well as explores layered meaning behind it. In addition, Miller uses a unique synthesis of the senses in her photograph, Exploding Hand. With the context of the image in a perfume shop window, the viewer begins to imagine standing in front of Grandland, taking a deep breath and looking at the construction from Miller's point of view. We can see Miller line up the scratches of the glass with the woman's hand, most likely exiting the shop. The woman probably smells of the shop inside or samples the salesperson has offered her. Upon further consideration, the viewer can observe wisps of condensation or fog collecting on the glass. We can nearly visualize the heady sexual mixture of the scents. Miller makes connections between sight and smell, heightening the impact of the photograph. Furthermore, scholar Catherine Connolly describes the way Miller involves our ears. Facing the shop front, we can even hear the quote-unquote explosion. She states, "The hand looks as though it were giving off sparks, as though it were exploding in a manner of a surrealist pun, where the distance between what you see or hear and what you think you have seen or heard sparks a moment of recognition." This synthesis, along with the intense study made by the viewer, presents synonymous with the surrealist vein of contemplation and meditation. In conclusion, Lee Miller was a great beauty and an explosive contribution to surrealism. She faced the aggressive, masculine nature of the Paris Surrealist movement with grace and spirit. Her photography contributed to Rosalind Krauss's theory that while photography is a physical trace of the real, it can be manipulated to serve the interest of surrealist ideas. Lee Miller's photograph, Exploding Hand, is an excellent example of Andre Breton's expressive goal defining the surrealist movement. Breton states, surrealism, expresses a desire to deepen the foundations of the real, to bring about an even clearer, and at the same time ever more passionate, consciousness of the world perceived by the senses. Through the analysis of this photograph and a series of photographs of the Grenland perfumery, we can examine her surrealist principles presented. She utilizes photo manipulation such as cropping, reflections, and sensations to portray the dual realities of surrealism. Her work sets a natural, feminine approach to surrealism. While seen mainly as a muse to artist Man Ray, Miller was a strong artist in her own right. Thank you.
And now questions for Sydney?
Yes.
I'm offering a course this fall on women in art, where we're going to both look at women artists who have been left out of the canon, as well as how women are portrayed in art. But something I noticed in your paper, in your reading, is a discussion of really a feminine style, or reference to strong feminine light, highlights feminine elements. And in a way, this can be a real catch-22, because once you identify something as a feminine style, you are walking a fine line with what the male gaze and the male patriarchal structures of the canon do, which is to say, as I said, the word more and go, it's okay to be amazing and encouraging in women, but you shouldn't be painting laws and such, because that is not feminine. And so I'm just bringing this to your attention, but also asking you, how would you describe a feminine work versus a masculine work? And if these are really gendered styles, can they be done by someone of the opposite gender?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll go back to these images here, and then even these images before them. Lee Miller, she's an incredible beauty. Man Ray really does depict, and he depicts Miller almost thousands of times. He has an incredible collection of photographs of Lee. And in every single one, Lee Miller is not displayed as the way she would display herself. And when I say I mean feminist, I mean there is a serious grace about these photographs. And I think Miller definitely does have some of that. He definitely has some of these elements.
There's a big difference, just as you pointed out,
Absolutely.
between the male gaze and the female. Can you go back to the one with her hand raised? That is an expression going into ancient times of sexual availability. I mean, you see it in the women on the Avignon ability, and she's proud of it. She's opening herself up to it. Where for him, it's definitely the male gaze that is consuming this tantalizing image, right?
Yes. And when I speak about feminine style, I mean it almost formally. And a lot of her images, I mean, these are,
Not.
yeah,
So
they're
those are not feminine style.
I would say that these are, honestly. There's a grace about these photographs that, even though, I mean, this is horrific, absolutely horrific, but there is a sense of, when we think surrealism, we think of the violence, right? You think of Salvador Dali, if you think of Magritte, you think of this juxtaposition that's so aggressive. And I think that Miller doesn't usually use this aggression, even in her other photographs. I think that there is a sense of grace and there is a sense of feminine wiles almost. I mean, she's sitting here and reflecting her own self in the window of this perfume shop, and she has the bottles, and she's wearing this cute little hat. But there is a sense of capturing this light that's natural in the world, that's natural and feminine. I think she just exposes it. In all honesty, I don't think she does much other than just expose it for what it is. If that answers your question. Anyone else have a question? Yes.
It's real simple. I'm just curious about how you found Lee Miller, how you came across her work, and what was it maybe that fascinated you about it?
Sure. So I was in a class last semester, 20th century photography, history, and theory, and we did study a lot of Man Ray in the beginning, but I had a professor who was very adamant on making sure there was a lot of women that were represented, and a lot of the images of Man Ray were of Lee Miller, and so she wanted to explore kind of her life beyond it. She had a very interesting life. She contracted a venereal disease when she was 7 years old. She was assaulted by a family friend, but she continued to go throughout her life, living it to the fullest possible capabilities. And I think my professor really just wanted to highlight the strength of Lee. And so I became fascinated with her, and then I tried to explore it further, and I really didn't find much. There's probably less than half a dozen, maybe a little more than half a dozen solo exhibitions of Lee Miller's work, and she has an incredible collection that her son has preserved over time, and he didn't begin to do it until after she died in 1977. And so I kind of wanted to explore a lot of uncharted territory in Lee Miller's work, and the way that she's not really recalled in the grand art historical record, and I wanted to know why. I wanted to know why, and I really do believe that it's in the basis of her modeling career. I mean, if you think of a model who becomes a photographer today, I wouldn't really think that many people would take her seriously. And I wanted to explore maybe why that's the case, when she obviously has these really incredible photographs. Yes?
When Alfred Stieglitz first saw Georgia O'Keeffe's work, he said something to the effect of like, finally we see a woman in this art. I mean, can you look at these photographs and say, like, I mean, obviously the ones where she's reflected, but can you look at her photographs overall and say, like, that definitely was taken by a woman? And if so, I mean, what traits do you see in them that suggest that?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I think in these photographs, when I really do the difference between Man Ray and Lee Miller, I kind of like to highlight the ways in which men see women and women see women. And it's not just themselves. I mean, this isn't Lee Miller. This is one of her friends, I believe, one of her modeling friends. And I really think that there is a certain respect that women have for women, and that is really, it comes across clearly in a lot of Lee's work. And not to say that these are necessarily disrespectful. I actually think that Man Ray's images of women are really beautiful, but sometimes are objectifying. And I think that women really, throughout time, have been adamant about pushing back against objectification of form, and they're not just sexual beings, they're people, with minds and personalities all on their own. And I really think that even though this is an isolated body, and it's not given, a face or a personality or a mind, that she still does pay respect to the grace of the form in a way that this kind of exposes the female without necessarily giving her any kind of power. I think there's a lot of power in Lee Miller's work. I mean, we see here, she obviously thinks well of herself. And not that she isn't here. I think she's gorgeous here. But I think Man Ray looks at her and sees something to love. And I think that Lee Miller really thinks herself is something to be. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Just wanted to, in relation to the injustice given to her, that I believe also a lot of our images of the concentration camps are a direct result of Lee Miller's time on the front line. She demonstrates just how strong she is and
Absolutely.
how important
Absolutely.
she is to photography.
Yes, and if you guys have any extra time, I would encourage you to go and explore her. There's an entire exhibition called Lee Miller, A Woman's War, and it's an absolutely stunning collection of just her war photographs. And Lee Miller was really messed up after she came back, and I mean, it's completely obvious why. But she took pictures of the liberation of concentration camps, and there are a couple of images where it's just bodies stacked on top of each other. And I think that she pays respect to these people in face of such horrible treatment. And there's another one of a barrack full of people who were basically sleeping next to each other and just emaciated. And I think that she was so devastated by the impact that she did her very best to expose these people in light of respect. So her war images are really, really phenomenal if you ever get the chance. Women in World War II were just, that's a cool subject to explore on itself. Yes, sir.
Was Lee Miller in Paris throughout the war, or did she come in after the invasion?
She came in after the invasion in 1942, I believe. She started to go to the front lines, and she photographed through 1945. So it was not very long period of time. But she really wanted to go to the front lines. Women weren't allowed to photograph the front lines at all, but I think she did it anyway. And that just says something about who she was as a person, but she was really incredible. But it wasn't a very long period of time, because I don't think it was allowed. Women were not allowed to go to the front lines unless they were nurses, taking care of soldiers. Any more questions? I'm gonna wrap it up.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Sydney.
you guys.